The Cathedral of St. Mary stood in the heart of Manhattan, its Gothic spires reaching toward a brilliant October sky. Inside, 300 guests filled the pews, their whispers creating a soft murmur that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. White roses and ivory ribbons decorated every surface, the scent of expensive perfume and anticipation thick in the air. This was the society wedding of the season, the union of Luca Lombardi, youngest son of one of New York's most prominent Italian families, and Serenity Jordan, the talented wedding planner who had somehow captured his heart. Serenity stood in the bridal suite, her reflection barely recognizable in the full-length mirror. The dress was a masterpiece of French lace and silk, custom designed to complement her rich brown skin and emphasize her curves. Her natural hair had been styled into an elegant updo adorned with tiny pearls, her makeup subtle but flawless. She looked like a bride from a magazine, which made sense since she had planned hundreds of weddings and knew exactly how to create perfection. What the reflection did not show was the knot of anxiety in her stomach, the small voice in her head that whispered this was all moving too fast. Serenity had met Luca 18 months ago when he had hired her company to plan a charity gala for his family's foundation. He had been charming, attentive, persistent in his pursuit of her despite her initial resistance. She had been 28 years old, focused on building her wedding planning business into something truly special, not looking for romance. But Luca had been determined, and gradually his enthusiasm had worn down her defenses. The courtship had been whirlwind. Expensive dinners, weekend trips to the Hamptons, introduction to his powerful family. Luca had proposed after just 6 months, presenting her with a diamond ring that probably cost more than her entire first year of business revenue. And Serenity, caught up in the romance and the security of being chosen by someone from such an influential family, had said yes. Now, standing in this bridal suite, she wondered if she had been more in love with the idea of Luca than the reality of him. He was fun and generous, but also impulsive and sometimes careless with her feelings. He made grand romantic gestures, but often forgot the small things, like calling when he said he would or showing up on time to events that mattered to her. There was also the matter of his family's business, which Serenity suspected involved activities far removed from their legitimate real estate and import operations. But it was too late for doubts now. 300 guests were waiting. The ceremony would begin in 15 minutes. In less than an hour, she would be Serenity Lombardi, wife of Luca and daughter-in-law to one of New York's most powerful families. A knock on the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Miss Jordan, it's time." Serenity took one last look at her reflection, squared her shoulders beneath the delicate lace of her dress, and nodded. "I'm ready." The ceremony was to be held in the main sanctuary, and as Serenity made her way through the cathedral's corridors, she could hear the string quartet beginning the prelude music. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped her bouquet of white roses and orchids, and she focused on breathing slowly, on putting one foot in front of the other in her designer heels. The doors to the sanctuary opened and the congregation rose. Serenity's breath caught as she took in the scene before her. The cathedral was even more beautiful than she had imagined during the planning process. Candlelight flickered from dozens of candelabras, casting everything in a warm, golden glow. The aisle stretched before her like a path to destiny, lined with more white roses and leading to the altar where Luca stood waiting. Except something was wrong. Serenity could see it immediately in Luca's posture. He was swaying slightly, one hand gripping the altar railing for support. His face was pale, a sheen of sweat visible even from this distance. The priest beside him looked concerned, leaning in to speak quietly to the groom. The music continued and Serenity began her walk down the aisle, her professional instincts warring with growing alarm. Something was very wrong. Luca looked ill, dangerously so. She quickened her pace, propriety forgotten in the face of obvious distress. She was halfway down the aisle when Luca collapsed. One moment he was standing at the altar, the next he was crumpling to the ground like a marionette with cut strings. The congregation gasped collectively, people rising from their seats in shock. Serenity dropped her bouquet and ran the rest of the distance, her dress billowing behind her, her heels clicking frantically against the marble floor. She reached the altar to find chaos. The priest was kneeling beside Luca, calling for a doctor. Several guests rushed forward, including the best man who was shouting for someone to call 911. And then there was Matteo. Matteo Lombardi, Luca's older brother, appeared seemingly out of nowhere, moving with purpose and control in the midst of panic. He dropped to his knees beside Luca, checking for a pulse, his face a mask of concentration. Serenity had met Matteo several times during her relationship with Luca, but they had never exchanged more than basic pleasantries. He was the serious brother, the one who ran the family business, the one who seemed to carry the weight of generations on his shoulders. "He's not breathing," Matteo said, his voice cutting through the noise with absolute authority. "Someone trained in CPR now." A doctor from the congregation rushed forward, and together he and Matteo began performing chest compressions. Serenity stood frozen in her wedding dress, watching the man she was supposed to marry fighting for his life on the altar steps. This could not be happening. This was not real. She was in the middle of a nightmare, and any moment she would wake up in her apartment, relieved it was all a dream. But she did not wake up. The nightmare continued. Paramedics arrived with incredible speed, probably stationed nearby for the high-profile wedding. They took over from Matteo and the doctor, working with efficient urgency, shouting medical terms Serenity did not understand. They loaded Luca onto a stretcher, still performing CPR, and rushed him out of the cathedral. The sanctuary had descended into shocked silence, broken only by the soft sounds of people crying. Serenity stood at the altar in her wedding dress, her mind blank with shock, unable to process what had just happened. Then Matteo was in front of her, his dark eyes intense, his hands gripping her shoulders. "Serenity, look at me." She focused on his face. He was handsome in a harder way than Luca, with sharp cheekbones and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his tailored suit emphasizing broad shoulders and a powerful build. At 37, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had learned early that the world would bend to his will. "We need to get to the hospital," Matteo said, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "Can you walk, or do you need help?" "I can walk," Serenity heard herself say, though her voice sounded distant, disconnected from her body. Matteo kept one hand on her elbow as he guided her down the aisle, through the cathedral, past the shocked faces of guests who had come to witness a wedding, and instead witnessed a tragedy. Outside, Matteo's driver had a black SUV waiting, engine running. Matteo helped Serenity into the back seat, her voluminous dress barely fitting through the door, then slid in beside her. "St. Luke's Hospital," he told the driver. "Fast, but safe." As the SUV pulled away from the cathedral, Serenity finally found her voice. "What happened? Was he sick? Did he know something was wrong?" "I don't know," Matteo said, and for the first time she heard emotion crack through his controlled exterior. Luca never mentioned any health problems. He was young, healthy. This should not have happened. People don't just collapse at their own wedding, Serenity said, her voice rising toward hysteria. "There has to be a reason. There has to be something." "Serenity." Matteo's hand covered hers, warm and steady. "Breathe. Panicking will not help Luca. We need to stay calm, get to the hospital, and find out what the doctors say. Can you do that?" She looked down at his hand covering hers and felt an inappropriate flutter in her chest. This was Luca's brother. She was wearing a wedding dress meant for Luca. Nothing about this moment should make her aware of Matteo as anything other than family, but there was something grounding about his presence, something solid and real when everything else felt like it was dissolving into chaos. "I can do that," she whispered. They made the rest of the drive in silence. Serenity stared out the window at the city passing by, her mind unable to settle on any single thought. Was Luca alive? Would he survive whatever had happened? Would she still marry him after this, or would the wedding need to be postponed? The questions swirled without answers, creating a maelstrom of anxiety that made it hard to breathe. At the hospital, Matteo handled everything with the efficiency of someone used to taking charge in crisis situations. He spoke to the nurses, got updates from the doctors, made phone calls to family members who needed to know what had happened. Serenity sat in the waiting room in her wedding dress, feeling like a ghost, while other people stared at her with pity and curiosity. Luca's mother arrived within 30 minutes, a small, elegant woman with iron in her spine and tears streaming down her face. She embraced Serenity briefly, then turned to Matteo for information. Other family members trickled in, filling the waiting room with the Lombardi clan, their voices hushed but urgent as they demanded answers that no one had. 2 hours passed, then 3. Serenity remained in her wedding dress because changing seemed like admitting this was real, that the day was truly ruined, that everything had changed. She sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, her hands folded in her lap, her mind cycling through the same memories on an endless loop. Luca smiling at her across the dinner table on their first date. Luca proposing on a beach in the Hamptons. Luca kissing her goodbye that morning, telling her the next time he saw her, she would be walking down the aisle toward him. Finally, a doctor emerged, his face grave. The family clustered around him, and Serenity found herself pushed to the back of the group. an outsider despite the wedding dress and the ring on her finger. "I'm very sorry," the doctor said. "We did everything we could, but the damage was too extensive. Luca Lombardi passed away at 4:47 this afternoon." The words hung in the air for a moment of absolute stillness. Then Luca's mother let out a wail of grief that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. Family members began to cry, to embrace each other, to demand details that the doctor provided with professional sympathy. Congenital heart defect. Undiagnosed. No way of knowing. Sometimes these things just happen. Serenity stood at the edge of the grieving family, feeling completely alone. The man she was supposed to marry was dead. The future she had planned had ended before it began, and she was standing in a hospital in a wedding dress that had cost $18,000, feeling nothing but a strange hollowness where her emotions should be. She felt more than saw Matteo move through the crowd toward her. His hand found her elbow again, that same steady grip that had guided her through the cathedral, through the car ride, through the waiting. "Come with me," he said quietly. He led her, away from the grieving family, down a corridor to a small private waiting room. Once inside, Matteo closed the door, muffling the sounds of crying from the main area. They were alone, and Serenity felt the last of her composure begin to crack. "He's really gone," she said, and her voice broke on the last word. "Yes," Matteo said simply. There was no false comfort, no platitudes about Luca being in a better place. Just the truth, stark and unavoidable. I was supposed to marry him. In 20 minutes, we were supposed to exchange vows. And now he's dead, and I'm standing here in a wedding dress, and I don't know what to do. The tears came then, hot and fast, ruining her carefully applied makeup. Serenity tried to hold them back, tried to maintain some shred of dignity, but it was useless. Everything she had been holding at bay since the moment Luca collapsed came pouring out in great heaving sobs, and then Matteo's arms were around her, pulling her against his chest, one hand cradling the back of her head while the other pressed against her back. She should not accept comfort from him. It was inappropriate, too intimate for two people who barely knew each other. But she could not bring herself to pull away. His embrace was the only thing keeping her from completely falling apart. "It's okay," he murmured against her hair. "Let it out. No one can hear you but me." So she cried into his expensive suit jacket, her fingers gripping the fabric, her body shaking with the force of her grief and shock and confusion. And Matteo held her through all of it, steady and solid, never trying to stop her or telling her to calm down. He just held her and let her break in the privacy of his arms. When the tears finally subsided, leaving her drained and hollow, Serenity became aware of how closely she was pressed against Matteo. She could feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, could smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine. She pulled back carefully, wiping at her face with shaking hands. "I'm sorry," she said. "I ruined your jacket." "I don't care about the jacket." Matteo's dark eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Are you okay?" "Stupid question. Obviously you're not okay. But can you function? Do you need a sedative? I can have the doctor." "No." Serenity shook her head. "No sedatives. I need to stay clear-headed. There are things that need to be handled. The wedding guests need to be notified. The vendors need to be told. The gifts will need to be returned. I planned this entire wedding, so I need to unplan it. You don't have to do that right now. What else am I supposed to do? Sit here and cry while your family grieves? I'm not really family, Matteo. I was about to be, but I'm not." Something flickered across Matteo's expression, something complicated and quickly hidden. "You were important to Luca. That makes you family as far as I'm concerned." "Your mother doesn't think so. She barely looked at me." "My mother is in shock. Don't take her reaction personally." Matteo paused, seemed to wrestle with something internal, then continued. "Listen to me carefully, Serenity. The next few days are going to be difficult. There will be a funeral to plan, family to deal with, legal matters to sort out. You don't have to face any of it alone." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I will help you. With the vendors, with the guests, with whatever you need. You were supposed to become part of this family today. Luca's death doesn't change that." Serenity searched his face, trying to understand what he was offering. "Why would you do that? You barely know me." Matteo was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tight. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "Because my brother cared about you. Because you deserve better than to be abandoned in your grief. And because—" He stopped, shook his head. "It doesn't matter. The point is, you don't have to do this alone." There was something in his eyes, something that made Serenity's pulse quicken despite the inappropriateness of the timing. But before she could analyze it, Matteo stepped back, putting professional distance between them again. "I should get back to my mother," he said. "But I meant what I said. Whatever you need, call me." He pulled a business card from his wallet and pressed it into her hand. Their fingers touched briefly, and Serenity felt that same inappropriate flutter she had experienced in the car. This was wrong. Her fiancé was dead, his body still warm in a hospital morgue, and she was noticing the way Matteo's touch made her skin tingle. "Thank you," she managed, "for everything." Matteo nodded and left the room, leaving Serenity alone with her thoughts and her ruined wedding dress and the business card that felt like both a lifeline and a dangerous temptation. The next week passed in a blur. Serenity moved through the days like a ghost, handling the necessary tasks with mechanical efficiency. She contacted vendors, canceled services, arranged for gifts to be returned. She fielded calls from concerned friends and colleagues, accepting their condolences with numb politeness. She avoided most of the Lombardi family, uncertain of her place in their grief when she had never officially become one of them. But Matteo was true to his word. He called her daily, checking in, offering assistance with logistics. When the caterer refused to refund the deposit, Matteo made a single phone call and the money appeared in Serenity's account within hours. When photographers needed to be dealt with, Matteo handled it. He was efficient, thorough, and always professional, never overstepping or assuming more than she was comfortable giving. The funeral was scheduled for 8 days after Luca's death. Serenity debated whether she should attend. She was not family, not really, and her presence might be seen as presumptuous. But not attending felt like a betrayal of the time she had spent with Luca, however complicated their relationship had been. In the end, she decided to go, wearing a simple black dress and taking a seat toward the back of the cathedral, the same cathedral where she was supposed to have married Luca. The irony was not lost on her. The service was beautiful and heartbreaking. Luca's friends spoke about his generosity and charm. His mother cried throughout the entire ceremony, and Matteo, as the eldest son, delivered a eulogy that was both eloquent and restrained, honoring his brother while maintaining the composure that seemed to be his default state. Serenity watched Matteo speak from her seat in the back, and something shifted in her chest. This was a man carrying the weight of his entire family's grief while showing none of his own. This was someone who had put aside his own pain to make sure everyone else was taken care of, including her, a woman who should have meant nothing to him. After the service, as people filed out toward the cemetery for the burial, Serenity started to slip away, but a hand on her arm stopped her. Matteo stood beside her, somehow having found her in the crowd. "You're coming to the burial," he said. It was not a question. "I wasn't planning to. It's for family." "You are family." His grip on her arm was gentle but insistent. "You were supposed to marry my brother. You were standing at the altar with him when he died. That makes you family, Serenity. Don't run from this." She wanted to argue, but something in his eyes stopped her. Beneath the control, she saw exhaustion and grief and something else, something that looked almost like desperation. He needed her there, she realized. For reasons she did not fully understand, Matteo Lombardi needed her to be present for his brother's burial. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll come." Relief flickered across his face, quickly masked. "Thank you. Ride with me." So, Serenity found herself in another black SUV with Matteo, heading to the cemetery where Luca would be laid to rest. They sat in silence, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that existed between people who understood that sometimes words were inadequate. At the graveside, Serenity stood slightly apart from the main family group, close enough to participate but far enough to respect boundaries. Matteo stood with his mother and sisters, his face a mask of controlled grief as the priest said the final prayers. As the casket was lowered into the ground, Serenity felt tears slip down her cheeks again. Not just for Luca, but for the future that would never be, for the simplicity of a life she had almost had before it was snatched away. She wiped at her eyes discreetly, trying not to draw attention. After the burial, family and close friends returned to the Lombardi estate in Brooklyn for a reception. Serenity again debated leaving, but Matteo appeared at her side before she could escape. "Stay," he said simply. "Please." She stayed. The Lombardi estate was massive, a sprawling property in Brooklyn Heights with views of Manhattan and enough space to accommodate the 100 or so people who had come to pay their respects. Serenity accepted a glass of wine from a passing server and tried to make herself invisible, standing near a window and watching the crowd. She noticed things because noticing details was part of her job as a wedding planner. She noticed the way people deferred to Matteo, the way they waited for his signal before speaking or moving. She noticed the subtle nods and glances that seemed to communicate entire conversations without words. She noticed that several of the men in attendance had a hard edge to them, the kind that suggested they were more than just business associates. Luca had told her his family was in real estate and import-export, but Serenity was not naive. She had suspected for months that the Lombardi family business involved activities that were not entirely legal. Being at this reception, watching these people interact, confirmed those suspicions. And at the center of it all was Matteo, navigating the complex social dynamics with the ease of someone who had been born to lead. He spoke with older men who clearly respected him, comforted younger relatives who looked to him for guidance, and managed his grieving mother with patience and care. Serenity was watching him interact with a group of associates when she felt someone approach. She turned to find Matteo's mother, Francesca Lombardi, standing beside her. "Mrs. Lombardi," Serenity said respectfully, "I'm so sorry for your loss." Francesca studied her with dark eyes that were red from crying, but still sharp with intelligence. "You were supposed to marry my son." "Yes. Did you love him?" The question was blunt, catching Serenity off guard. She considered lying, offering the platitude that was expected. But something about Francesca's direct gaze demanded honesty. "I cared for him very much," Serenity said carefully. "I'm not sure if it was love, but I wanted it to be. Does that make sense?" To her surprise, Francesca's expression softened slightly. "Yes, it makes perfect sense. Luca was easy to care for, but difficult to truly love. He was like his father that way. All charm and surface, not much depth beneath." Serenity did not know how to respond to that. Francesca continued, her voice dropping lower. "My son Matteo, now he is different. Deep waters, that one. Runs everything, controls everything, protects everyone. Including you, I notice. He's been very kind in helping with the wedding cancellation logistics." Kind. Francesca made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Matteo is many things, but kind is not the word I would choose. Protective, yes. Possessive, certainly. But kind implies softness he does not have." Before Serenity could respond, Francesca patted her arm and walked away, leaving her more confused than before. The reception finally ended as evening fell. Serenity said her goodbyes and headed toward the door, ready to escape to the solitude of her apartment. But Matteo intercepted her in the foyer. "Let me drive you home," he said. "That's not necessary. I can call a car." "I know you can. I'm offering anyway." Serenity was too tired to argue. She nodded, and Matteo guided her to yet another black SUV, this time driving himself rather than using his driver. They pulled away from the estate, and Serenity watched the city lights blur past the window. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything this past week. I don't think I could have managed without your help." "You would have managed. You're stronger than you think." Matteo's hands were steady on the steering wheel, his profile illuminated by the dashboard lights. "But I'm glad I could help. Your mother said something interesting to me tonight." "My mother says a lot of interesting things, especially when she's been drinking wine. She said you're protective and possessive." Matteo's jaw tightened slightly. "She's not wrong. Why have you been so protective of me? You said it's because I was important to Luca, but I feel like there's more to it than that." For a long moment, Matteo was silent. They stopped at a red light, and he turned to look at her fully, his dark eyes intense in the dim interior of the car. "Do you really want to know?" "Yes." He took a breath, seemed to come to a decision. "Because I've been in love with you since the day Luca introduced us." Serenity's breath caught. "What?" 2 years ago, at that charity gala, Luca brought you to meet the family, showed you off like a trophy he'd won. And the moment I saw you, I knew. You were the one I'd been waiting for my entire life. You were smart and beautiful and real in a way the women in my world never are. And you were with my brother. "Matteo, let me finish." His voice was rough with emotion now, the control finally cracking. "I spent 2 years watching you with Luca, watching him take you for granted, watching him fail to appreciate what he had. I watched you plan your wedding, knowing I should stop it, knowing you deserved better. But you seemed happy, and I thought maybe I was wrong. Maybe you two would be good together." "But you weren't wrong," Serenity said softly, understanding dawning. "No, I saw it in your eyes at the cathedral, right before Luca collapsed. You were having doubts. You were wondering if you were making a mistake. And then he died. and I felt like the worst person in the world because part of me was relieved. Matteo, I know how that sounds. My brother is dead, and I'm relieved because it means you're free. What kind of person does that make me? Serenity reached across the console and took his hand, the same way he had taken hers in the car ride to the hospital. It makes you human, and honest, and brave for telling me the truth. He looked down at their joined hands, then back at her face. I'm not telling you this to pressure you into anything. You need time to grieve, to process everything that's happened. I just needed you to know the truth. I needed you to understand why I've been so protective, why I can't seem to stay away even though I should. The light turned green, but Matteo did not move. Cars honked behind them and he finally pulled forward, but the charged atmosphere in the vehicle remained. When they reached Serenity's apartment building, Matteo put the car in park but made no move to get out. They sat in heavy silence, the weight of his confession hanging between them. I don't know what to say, Serenity admitted. This is all so much so fast. A week ago, I was about to marry your brother. Now he's dead, and you're telling me you've been in love with me for 2 years. I know, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said anything. No. Serenity squeezed his hand. I'm glad you did. I just need time to process it all. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. Serenity looked at this complicated, powerful man who had just laid his heart bare and felt something shift in her chest. Guilt, certainly, for feeling anything at all so soon after Luca's death, but also curiosity and attraction, and the beginning of something that felt dangerously like hope. Good night, Matteo. Good night, Serenity. She got out of the car and walked to her building, feeling his eyes on her back the entire way. When she reached her apartment and finally closed the door behind her, Serenity leaned against it and let out a shaky breath. Her life had changed completely in the span of a week. The man she was supposed to marry was dead. And his brother, a dangerous man with dark eyes and depths she had never explored, had just confessed he loved her. Serenity did not know what would happen next. But for the first time since Luca collapsed at the altar, she felt something other than numbness. She felt alive and afraid and curious about where this impossible situation might lead. The next 3 months were a study in restraint. Matteo kept his distance, giving Serenity the space she needed to grieve and process. But he was always there in the background, a steady presence she could rely on. He called once a week to check in. He sent her information about grief counseling groups. When she mentioned struggling to focus on work, he connected her with a business consultant who helped her streamline her operations. He never pushed for more, never mentioned his feelings again, never tried to leverage her grief or vulnerability. He was just there, solid and reliable, showing her through actions what kind of man he was. Serenity found herself thinking about him more than she should. She would be working on a client's wedding and remember the way Matteo had looked at her in the car, the intensity in his eyes when he confessed his love. She would be grocery shopping and pick up a bottle of wine he had mentioned liking, then feel guilty for noticing such details. She would lie, awake at night and wonder what it would be like to be loved by someone as controlled and powerful as Matteo Lombardi. She also spent those months truly processing her relationship with Luca. In death, it was easier to see their dynamic clearly. Luca had been fun but unreliable, charming but shallow. He had loved her in his way, but it had been a selfish love, one that took more than it gave. Serenity had been planning to marry him not because she was deeply in love, but because it seemed like the right next step, the safe choice. And then Luca had died, and suddenly nothing was safe anymore. 4 months after the funeral, Serenity finally called Matteo, not for help with logistics or business advice, but just to talk. They met for coffee at a quiet cafe in Manhattan, sitting across from each other in a corner booth. Matteo looked tired, Serenity noticed. There were new lines around his eyes, a tension in his shoulders that suggested he was carrying heavy burdens. "How are you?" she asked. "Busy. The family business requires constant attention." He took a sip of his espresso. "How are you?" "Better. I've been doing the grief counseling you recommended. It's helping." "Good. I'm glad." They fell into easy conversation, talking about neutral topics at first, then gradually opening up about more personal things. Matteo told her about the pressure of running the family business, the weight of responsibility, the loneliness of being the one everyone relied on. Serenity talked about rebuilding her business, about learning to trust her instincts again, about slowly emerging from the fog of grief. "I've been thinking about what you said," Serenity admitted over her second cup of coffee. In the car, after the reception. Matteo's expression became carefully neutral. You don't have to. I want to. I need to. She took a breath. You said you'd been in love with me for 2 years, that you watched me with Luca and knew I deserved better. Yes. You were right. I did deserve better. Luca and we weren't right for each other. I think I knew that deep down, but I was trying so hard to make it work that I ignored all the signs. Serenity, I'm not done. She reached across the table and took his hand, echoing the gesture he had made months ago. I need you to know that I'm not with you because Luca died, or because you've been kind to me, or because I'm lonely. I'm with you because in these past 4 months, I've seen who you really are, and I want to know more. Matteo's fingers tightened around hers. Are you sure? This won't be easy. My world is complicated and sometimes dangerous. Being with me comes with risks. I know, and I'm choosing it anyway. Choosing you. For the first time since she had known him, Serenity saw Matteo's control slip completely. Relief and joy and something that looked like wonder crossed his face. He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. I promise to spend every day proving I'm worth that choice, he said. They took things slowly at first, mindful of appearances and the need to respect Luca's memory. Private dinners instead of public dates. Quiet evenings at Serenity's apartment instead of family gatherings. They learned each other gradually, building a foundation based on honesty and mutual respect. The first real date happened on a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after their coffee shop confession. Matteo picked Serenity up from her office, looking devastating in a dark suit that emphasized his broad shoulders. He took her to a small Italian restaurant in Brooklyn, the kind of place that did not take reservations, but somehow had a table waiting when Luca Lombardi walked through the door. Tell me something about yourself that I don't know, Serenity said over wine and homemade pasta. Something real, not the polished version you show the world. Matteo considered the question seriously, twirling his wineglass between his fingers. I wanted to be a teacher when I was young. History, specifically. I loved learning about how empires rose and fell, how power shifted through generations, how one decision could change the course of entire civilizations. What stopped you? My father died when I was 22. I was in graduate school, planning to get my doctorate. But with him gone, someone had to take over the family business. That someone was me. He paused, his expression distant. Luca was too young, too reckless. My mother couldn't do it. The responsibility fell to me by default, and I've been carrying it ever since. Do you regret it? Sometimes, especially when I'm dealing with the uglier parts of the business. But then I think about the people who depend on me, the families who work for us, the community we support. It's not the life I would have chosen, but it's the one I have, and I try to make it mean something. Serenity reached across the table and took his hand. You do make it mean something. I've seen how people respond to you, Matteo. They respect you. They trust you. That's not nothing. It's also not enough, not anymore. His dark eyes held hers. You make me want more, Serenity. You make me want to be better than what this world shaped me to be. They talked for 3 hours that night, the restaurant gradually emptying around them until they were the last customers. The owner, an elderly Italian man named Giuseppe, brought them complimentary limoncello and said something in rapid Italian to Matteo that made him smile genuinely. What did he say? Serenity asked after Giuseppe had walked away. He said you're good for me, that he hasn't seen me smile like this in years. Matteo's thumb stroked across her knuckles. He's right. You are good for me. You're good for me too. You see me, Matteo, not as Luca's almost widow, not as the wedding planner who had a public tragedy. You see Serenity, the actual person beneath all the roles I play. I will always see you, Bella. That's a promise. But their relationship was not without challenges. The biggest came 2 months into their courtship, when Serenity arrived at Matteo's Manhattan penthouse for dinner and found him in his study, surrounded by papers, his jaw tight with stress. What's wrong? She asked from the doorway. Matteo looked up and she saw exhaustion in his eyes. Business problems. Nothing for you to worry about? Don't do that. Serenity crossed the room and sat on the edge of his desk. Don't shut me out when things get hard. I told you I'm choosing all of you, remember? That includes the difficult parts. He studied her for a long moment, then pushed back from his desk and pulled her into his lap. She went willingly, wrapping her arms around his neck. There's a territory dispute, he said quietly. Some young hotheads from Queens think they can move into our operations. They've been aggressive, violent. 2 of our warehouses were vandalized last week. Yesterday, one of our drivers was beaten so badly he's in the hospital. Serenity felt ice trickle down her spine. This was the dangerous world Matteo had warned her about, the reality beneath the expensive suits and elegant restaurants. What are you going to do? What I have to do? Make it clear that we're not weak, that there are consequences for attacking us. It will involve violence, Serenity. Not from me directly if I can help it, but I'll give the orders that make it happen. Does that frighten you? She was quiet for a moment, processing. Yes, it frightens me that you might get hurt. It frightens me that people you care about are being targeted. But I understand that this is your world, and sometimes violence is the only language that world speaks. I'm trying to build something different, to move us away from this. But change takes time, and in the meantime, I have to protect what's ours using the tools available to me. I know. Just promise me you'll be careful, that you'll come home to me. Matteo cupped her face in his hands. I will always come home to you. That's not negotiable. The next week was tense. Matteo was gone more than usual, his phone constantly ringing with updates and reports. Serenity tried to focus on her work, on the weddings she was planning for other couples, but her mind kept drifting to Matteo and whatever was happening in his world. Then one night he showed up at her apartment at 2 a.m. She opened the door to find him standing there, his suit jacket gone, his shirt untucked, dried blood on his knuckles. Matteo, she breathed, pulling him inside. Are you okay? The blood isn't mine. He let her lead him to the bathroom where she carefully cleaned his hands. It's handled. The threat is neutralized. No one will challenge us again for a long time. Serenity did not ask for details. She did not want to know exactly what neutralized meant. Instead, she finished cleaning his hands, led him to her bedroom, and held him while he finally let the tension drain from his body. I hate that you saw me like this, he murmured against her hair. Why? Because you're not perfect? Because you get your hands dirty protecting the people you care about? She pulled back to look at him. I don't need perfect, Matteo. I need real. And this is real. He kissed her then, deep and hungry, pouring weeks of stress and fear and relief into the connection. And Serenity kissed him back, showing him without words that she meant what she said. She was choosing all of him, even the parts that frightened her, even the parts that lived in shadows. They made love that night with an intensity that left them both breathless. Matteo worshipped her body like she was sacred, took his time discovering every curve and hollow, every sound she made, and Serenity gave herself to him completely, trusting him with her vulnerability, her pleasure, her heart. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Matteo spoke quietly. I love you, Serenity Jordan. I know it's too soon to say it, but I don't care. I've loved you for 3 years, and I'm not waiting any longer to tell you the truth. Serenity felt tears prick her eyes. I love you too. I think I have for a while now, but I was afraid to admit it. Afraid it was too soon. Afraid people would judge us. Afraid of 100 things that don't matter compared to how I feel when I'm with you. Don't be afraid. Not of this. Not of us. He kissed her forehead. We're going to face enough challenges from the outside world. Let's at least be certain of each other. I'm certain, Serenity whispered, more certain than I've ever been about anything. But certainty did not protect them from family drama. When Matteo's sisters found out about the relationship, they were vocal in their disapproval. The youngest, Gabriella, cornered Serenity at a family dinner 3 months into the relationship. You have some nerve, Gabriella hissed, her eyes flashing with anger, showing up here like you belong when you were supposed to marry Luca. I care about Matteo, Serenity said quietly, trying not to make a scene. What we have is real. It's disgusting is what it is. My brother is barely cold in his grave, and you're already sleeping with his brother. What kind of woman does that? The words stung, hitting on Serenity's deepest insecurities. She had worried about the same things, questioned her own timeline, wondered if she was being disrespectful to Luca's memory. Matteo appeared at her side before she could formulate a response. His hand settled on the small of Serenity's back, a gesture that was both protective and possessive. Gabriella, he said quietly, but there was steel beneath the calm. You will apologize to Serenity, now. I will not. She needs to hear the truth. The truth is that I love her. The truth is that Luca and Serenity were not happy together, and if he had lived, their marriage would likely have ended in divorce within 2 years. The truth, is that I have been in love with Serenity since before Luca ever proposed, and I spent 2 years in agony watching her with the wrong man." The dinner table had gone silent, everyone listening to this declaration. Serenity felt her face heat with embarrassment, but Matteo continued, his voice never rising but carrying absolute authority. "The truth is that Serenity makes me happy in a way I never thought I could be. She makes me want to be better, to do better, to build something worthy of her love. And if you cannot respect that, if you cannot be happy that I have found someone who sees me as more than just the head of this family, then you can leave. But you will not disrespect her in my presence. Is that understood?" Gabriella's face was red, tears in her eyes. She was Luca's. She was never anyone's but her own. Matteo's arm tightened around Serenity. "And she chooses to be with me. That should be enough for you." Francesca Lombardi, who had been watching this exchange with keen eyes, finally spoke. "Gabriella, sit down and be quiet. Your brother is right. Luca and this young woman were not suited. I saw that from the beginning. Matteo and Serenity, however, fit together in a way that makes sense. It is unusual timing, yes, but love does not operate on convenient schedules." Gabriella looked like she wanted to argue more, but one glance at her mother's face silenced her. She sat down with poor grace, and the dinner continued, though the atmosphere remained tense. Later that night, as Matteo drove Serenity home, she finally let the tears fall. "I'm sorry, I've caused problems in your family." "You've caused nothing. My sister is grieving and doesn't know how to process it. She'll come around eventually." "What if she doesn't? What if none of them ever accept this?" Matteo pulled the car over to the side of the road and turned to face her. "Then they don't accept it. Serenity, I love my family, but you are my choice, my priority, my future. If I have to choose between keeping the peace with my sisters and keeping you, I will choose you every single time. Do you understand that? I don't want to be the reason your family falls apart. You're not. You're the reason I have something worth protecting beyond duty and obligation. You're the reason I wake up excited for the day instead of dreading it. You're the reason I'm working so hard to build something legitimate, because I want to give you a life that doesn't require constantly looking over our shoulders." Serenity leaned across the console and kissed him, trying to pour all her gratitude and love into the connection. "I don't deserve you. You deserve everything," Matteo murmured against her lips, "and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you have it." The family tension gradually eased over the following months. Gabriella remained cool but stopped actively undermining the relationship. Matteo's other sister, Isabella, cautiously warmed to Serenity after seeing how happy Matteo was, and Francesca became an unexpected ally, inviting Serenity to family events and making it clear through word and action that she approved of the relationship. "Luca was my son, and I loved him," Francesca told Serenity during a private lunch, "but he was not meant for you. He would have made you miserable with his recklessness and his inability to commit to anything fully. Matteo, on the other hand, commits completely. When he loves with everything he has. You are very lucky." "I know," Serenity said softly. "I remind myself of that every day." "Good. Because my son is also lucky to have found you. You ground him, make him remember there is life beyond business and duty. That is a gift." The wedding planning began 6 months into their engagement. Serenity, despite her profession, wanted something simple. The elaborate cathedral wedding she had planned for Luca felt like it belonged to a different life, a different version of herself. For Matteo, she wanted something intimate and real. They chose a small chapel in upstate New York, a stone building surrounded by gardens that bloomed in late spring. The guest list was limited to 30 people, close family and friends only. Serenity designed the event herself, choosing soft colors and natural elements that reflected her aesthetic and Matteo's preference for understated elegance. The night before the wedding, Serenity stayed at a bed and breakfast near the chapel, while Matteo stayed at a hotel in town. It was the first time they had spent a night apart in months, and Serenity found herself missing him with an intensity that surprised her. Her phone rang at 11 p.m., Matteo's name appeared on the screen, and she answered with a smile. "Isn't it bad luck to talk to the bride before the wedding?" "That's only if you see each other. I needed to hear your voice." Matteo sounded tired but content. "Are you nervous?" "Not about marrying you. A little nervous about the ceremony itself. What if I trip walking down the aisle? What if I forget my vows?" "Then I will catch you, and I will remind you of your vows, and we will laugh about it for the rest of our lives." His voice was warm with affection. Serenity, tomorrow is just a formality. You've been mine since that day you called me for coffee. The wedding is just us making that official. I like the sound of that, being yours. Good. Because I am completely, utterly yours. No takebacks, no regrets, no second thoughts. Same. I love you, Matteo Lombardi. I love you, Serenity Jordan. Soon to be Serenity Lombardi. I cannot wait to call you my wife. They talked for another hour, about nothing and everything, until Serenity's eyes grew heavy and Matteo insisted she get some sleep. She fell asleep with her phone still on the pillow beside her, feeling loved and cherished and completely certain about the choice she was making. The wedding day dawned, clear and beautiful, the May sunshine streaming. Through the windows of the bed and breakfast, Serenity's small bridal party, consisting of her best friend from college and Matteo's sister Isabella, helped her get ready. The dress she had chosen was simple but elegant, ivory silk that hugged her curves and had a short train that would not be cumbersome during the ceremony. As she looked at herself in the mirror, Serenity thought about the last time she had worn a wedding dress. Standing in that cathedral, feeling uncertain and anxious, marrying a man she cared for but did not truly love. Today was completely different. Today she was marrying her best friend, her partner, the man who saw all of her and loved her anyway. You look beautiful, Isabella said softly, adjusting Serenity's veil. My brother is a lucky man. Thank you for being here, for accepting this, for giving us your blessing. You make him happy. That's all I've ever wanted from Matteo, for him to find someone who makes carrying all that responsibility worthwhile. You do that for him. The ceremony was everything Serenity had hoped for. Simple, heartfelt, filled with love instead of obligation. When she walked down the aisle on the arm of her uncle, the only family she had left, she had eyes only for Matteo waiting at the altar. He looked devastating in a tailored charcoal suit, his dark eyes bright with emotion as he watched her approach. When she reached him and placed her hand in his, Serenity felt a sense of rightness settle over her like a blessing. The vows they had written themselves were simple and true. Matteo promised to love her, protect her, support her dreams, and grow old beside her. Serenity promised to stand by him, believe in him, challenge him to be his best self, and choose him every single day. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Matteo pulled her close and kissed her with a tenderness that made tears slip down Serenity's cheeks. This was what love should feel like, she realized. Not obligation or convenience, but genuine connection and mutual devotion. I love you, Mrs. Lombardi, Matteo murmured against her lips. I love you too, Mr. Lombardi. Afterward, lying in his arms in the darkness of her bedroom, Serenity traced patterns on his chest. Tell me about your family business, she said quietly. The real business, not the real estate cover. Matteo was silent for a long moment. Are you sure you want to know? I'm choosing you, Matteo. All of you. That includes understanding your world. So he told her about the legitimate businesses that served as fronts for less legal operations, about the network of alliances and obligations that had been built over generations, about the violence that sometimes erupted when territories were challenged or respect was disrespected, about the constant balancing act of maintaining power while staying ahead of law enforcement. He did not sugarcoat it or try to make it sound more acceptable. He gave her the truth, raw and unvarnished, and waited for her reaction. Thank you for being honest, Serenity said finally. I won't pretend I'm not concerned, but I appreciate that you trust me enough to tell me the truth. I need you to understand something. Matteo tilted her face up to look at him. I'm working to transition the family into more legitimate operations. It won't happen overnight, but I'm moving us in that direction. For my own sake, and now for yours. I want to build a life with you that doesn't require constantly looking over our shoulders. That's a big undertaking. I know, but you're worth it. You make me want to be better than what I was born into. Serenity kissed him, slow and deep, trying to convey through touch what she could not quite put into words. That she believed in him, that she was choosing this path with eyes open, that she was falling in love with this complicated, powerful, surprisingly tender man. Going public with their relationship was harder than either anticipated. The Lombardi family had mixed reactions. Matteo's mother was surprisingly supportive, telling Serenity privately that she had always known Matteo was the better match. But his sisters were scandalized, whispering about disrespect to Luca's memory. Associates raised eyebrows at the speed of the relationship, questioning Matteo's judgment. But Matteo weathered it all with his characteristic control, making it clear through word and action that Serenity was his choice, and anyone who had a problem with that could take it up with him directly. Slowly, the family came to accept the relationship, won over by Serenity's grace and the clear devotion between her and Matteo. 1 year after Luca's death, Matteo took Serenity back to the cathedral, where everything had changed. They stood at the altar where Luca had collapsed, and Matteo pulled a small box from his pocket. "I know the timing might seem fast to some people," he said, "but I've loved you for 3 years. I've spent the last year proving that love through actions instead of just words, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you every day that I'm worthy of your choice." He opened the box to reveal a ring. Not a flashy diamond meant to impress, but a simple platinum band with a single perfect sapphire, the color of midnight. "Serenity Jordan, will you marry me? Not because it's expected or convenient or safe, but because I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." Serenity looked at the ring, then at Matteo's face, and felt her heart expand with certainty. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He slid the ring onto her finger and kissed her right there at the altar, the same altar where her life had shattered and begun to rebuild all at once. It felt like closing a circle, like honoring both the tragedy that had brought them together and the love that had grown from it. They married 6 months later in a small private ceremony, nothing like the elaborate wedding that had been planned for her and Luca. Just close family and friends, simple vows, and a deep sense of rightness that permeated everything. Standing at that same altar, this time exchanging vows with Matteo instead of Luca, Serenity reflected on how strange and unpredictable life could be. She had been so certain about her path, so convinced she knew what her future would look like, and then everything had changed in a single devastating moment. But from that tragedy had come something unexpected, a love that was deeper and truer than anything she had imagined. A partner who saw all of her and loved her, not despite her complexity, but because of it. A future that was uncertain in many ways, but built on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. As Matteo slid the wedding band onto her finger, Serenity caught sight of his mother in the front row, smiling through happy tears. She thought about Luca, gone but not forgotten, his memory a bittersweet thread in the fabric of her life. She thought about all the twists and turns that had led her to this moment, standing at this altar with this man, choosing a future she could never have predicted. "I love you," Matteo murmured as the priest pronounced them husband and wife. "I love you too," Serenity replied, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Their life together was not perfect. Matteo's work still brought danger and complications. There were late-night calls and tense meetings and moments when Serenity worried about his safety. But they faced it together, partners in every sense of the word. The first real test came 8 months into their marriage. Serenity was at her office reviewing floral arrangements for an upcoming wedding when her phone rang. An unknown number, which she almost did not answer, but something made her pick up. "Mrs. Lombardi?" The voice was unfamiliar, tight with stress. "Yes?" "This is Dr. Chen at Mount Sinai Hospital. Your husband has been brought in. You should come right away." The world tilted. Serenity's hands started shaking so badly she almost dropped the phone. "What happened? Is he okay?" "He's stable, but he's asking for you. Please come as soon as you can." Serenity grabbed her purse and ran. She did not bother calling a car service, just flagged down a taxi and promised the driver double his fare if he got her to Mount Sinai in under 10 minutes. The ride felt like an eternity. Every red light a torture, every slow-moving vehicle an obstacle between her and Matteo. At the hospital, she found Paolo in the waiting room, his normally composed face drawn with worry. "What happened?" Serenity demanded. "There was a meeting. Someone brought a gun. Matteo tried to de-escalate, but the man panicked. He fired. Matteo was hit in the shoulder." Paolo gripped her hand. "He is going to be okay, Serenity. The doctor said the bullet missed all major arteries. But it was close. Too close." Serenity felt bile rise in her throat. This was the reality she had signed up for, the danger, that came with loving Matteo Lombardi, but knowing it intellectually and facing it in reality were very different things. "Can I see him?" "They are finishing up now. The doctor will come get you soon." 30 minutes later, Serenity was ushered into a private recovery room where Matteo lay in a hospital bed, his left shoulder heavily bandaged, an IV in his arm. His eyes were closed, but they opened when she entered, and the relief in them was palpable. "Serenity," he said, his voice rough from the anesthesia. She crossed to the bed and took his good hand, fighting back tears. "You scared me half to death. I am sorry. This was not supposed to happen. The situation escalated faster than I anticipated. What situation? Who shot you? Matteo grimaced. A business associate who thought I was not negotiating in good faith. Paolo has already handled it. The man will not be a problem again. I don't care about him. I care about you. The tears came despite her best efforts. Matteo, when I got that call, I thought I was going to lose you. I thought I was going to be a widow for real this time, and I could not breathe. Hey. Matteo squeezed her hand. I am right here. A little banged up, but alive. It takes more than one bullet to keep me down. That is not funny. I know. I'm sorry. He pulled her closer, awkward with only one functioning arm. This is why I have been working so hard to legitimize our operations, so moments like this do not happen, so I can come home to you every night without you wondering if I'm going to end up in a hospital or worse. How long? Serenity asked. How long until you are completely out of the dangerous parts of the business? 2 years, maybe 3. I have plans in motion, deals being negotiated, but these things take time, Serenity, patience. I am not good at patience when it comes to your safety. Neither am I when it comes to yours. Matteo cupped her face with his good hand, his thumb brushing away her tears. But we will get through this. Together. We always do. He was right, of course. They did get through it. Matteo recovered from the gunshot wound with minimal complications, though he carried the scar as a reminder of how quickly things could go wrong. And true to his word, he systematically dismantled the more dangerous elements of the family business, replacing them with legitimate ventures that generated just as much revenue without the constant threat of violence. Matteo was true to his word about transitioning the family business toward legitimacy. It took years and required careful navigation of complex relationships, but slowly he built an empire that could exist in the daylight instead of the shadows. Serenity supported him through it all, using her own business acumen to help strategize and plan. She also grew her wedding planning business into something remarkable. With Matteo's connections and her talent, she became the go-to planner for high society weddings, expanding from New York to clients across the country. She hired a team, opened a second office, and built a reputation for creating events that were both elegant and personal. Sometimes, planning weddings felt bittersweet. Every bride walking down an aisle reminded her of that day in the cathedral when everything had changed. But it also reminded her that love came in many forms, that every couple's story was unique, and that sometimes the most beautiful endings came from the most tragic beginnings. They had their first child 3 years after their wedding, a daughter with Serenity's eyes and Matteo's determination. Watching him with their baby, seeing the tenderness with which he held her and the fierce protectiveness in his eyes, Serenity fell in love with him all over again. Matteo was an incredible father. Despite his demanding work schedule, he made time for their daughter, reading to her every night, teaching her Italian words, carrying her around the house on his shoulders. He was patient and present in ways his own father never had been, determined to break the cycle of emotional distance that had defined previous generations of Lombardi men. Do you ever think about how we got here? Serenity asked one evening as they sat in the nursery, watching their daughter sleep. Every day, Matteo replied, his arm around Serenity's shoulders. I think about Luca, about how his death brought us together. I feel guilty sometimes, being this happy when it came at the cost of my brother's life. I know, I feel that too. But I don't think Luca would want us to spend our lives guilty and miserable. No, he wouldn't. He'd probably make some joke about finally getting me to settle down. Serenity leaned her head on Matteo's shoulder. I'm glad you told me the truth. That day in the car, after the reception, it changed everything. I almost didn't. I thought I should wait, give you more time. But I needed you to know, needed you to understand that what I felt was real, not just grief or obligation. I'm glad you didn't wait. I needed to know that someone saw me, really saw me, and chose me anyway. Matteo kissed the top of her head. I will always choose you, Serenity. In every lifetime, in every possible universe, I will always choose you. Their second child came 2 years later, a son they named Luca, in honor of Matteo's brother. It was Francesca who suggested the name, telling them that honoring Luca's memory by giving his nephew his name would help heal old wounds. He was not perfect, Francesca said, holding baby Luca in her arms with tears streaming down her face. But he was my son, and I loved him. Giving this child his name, it feels like a second chance, a way to remember the good parts of who he was. Matteo and Serenity agreed, though they added a caveat. Their Luca would be raised with honesty and integrity, taught from a young age about the importance of responsibility and respect. He would know the truth about his uncle, the mistakes that had been made, and hopefully learn from them. As the years passed, Matteo successfully transitioned the family business into completely legitimate operations. Real estate development became their primary focus, along with several tech startups that Matteo funded and mentored. The Lombardi name, once associated with whispered rumors and dark dealings, became known for philanthropy and community development. Matteo established a foundation in Luca's name, focused on heart health awareness and supporting families affected by sudden cardiac death. It was his way of turning tragedy into something positive, of making sure his brother's death meant something beyond just their personal pain. Serenity served on the foundation board, using her planning skills to organize fundraising galas and awareness events. It became a passion project for both of them, a way to honor Luca while helping others avoid similar tragedies. 5 years into their marriage, on their anniversary, Matteo took Serenity back to the small chapel where they had married. They stood in the same spot where they had exchanged vows, and Matteo pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. "I wanted to give you something," he said, "something that represents who we are now, not just who we were when we started." Inside the box was a necklace, a delicate platinum chain with a pendant in the shape of an infinity symbol, one half studded with diamonds, the other half with sapphires. "The diamonds are for the light we've found together," Matteo explained as he clasped it around her neck. "The sapphires are for the depth of what we've overcome. Together they represent eternity, because that is what I promise you, Serenity, an eternity of choosing you, loving you, building with you." Serenity touched the pendant, tears streaming down her face. "It's perfect. You're perfect. I am far from perfect, but with you, I am the best version of myself I can be." They renewed their vows that day, privately with just the two of them and the same priest who had married them 5 years earlier. It felt like closing a circle, like affirming that the choice they had made was still the right one. 10 years into their marriage, Serenity stood in the same cathedral where her life had changed forever. But this time she was not the bride. She was there as a wedding planner, orchestrating the marriage of a young couple whose story had moved her. As she walked down the aisle, making final adjustments to the floral arrangements, Serenity paused at the spot where Luca had collapsed all those years ago. For a moment she let herself remember that day. The shock, the grief, the complete upheaval of everything she thought she knew about her life. Then she looked toward the back of the cathedral where Matteo waited for her, watching her with those intense dark eyes that still made her breath catch after a decade together. He smiled at her, and she smiled back, grateful for the journey that had brought them here. That night, after the wedding was over and they had returned home to their children, Matteo pulled Serenity onto the balcony of their penthouse overlooking Manhattan. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "About how strange life is, how one terrible moment can lead to something beautiful, how I was standing at that altar 10 years ago thinking my life was over and instead it was just beginning. Do you ever wish things had been different? That Luca had lived? That we had met some other way?" Serenity considered the question seriously. "I wish Luca had lived to find someone who was right for him, to have a chance at real happiness. But no, I do not wish we had met differently, because everything that happened, all the pain and grief and complicated choices, they made us who we are. They taught us to appreciate what we have. I love you, Serenity Lombardi, more today than yesterday, less than I will tomorrow. I love you too, Matteo. Thank you for waiting for me, for loving me even when it seemed impossible, for building this life with me." They stood together on that balcony, watching the city lights twinkle below, and Serenity thought about the 16-year-old girl she had been, dreaming about her future. She had imagined success and happiness, but never could she have imagined this specific path. Never could she have imagined standing at an altar watching one man die, only to find her true home in the arms of his brother. Life was strange and unpredictable and sometimes terrifyingly painful, but it was also beautiful and full of second chances and capable of healing in ways that seemed impossible in the darkest moments. Years later, when their daughter was old enough to ask questions, Serenity told her the truth about how she and Matteo met. Not the simplified version, but the real story with all its complications and tragedy and unexpected grace. She told her about Luca, about standing at an altar in a wedding dress and watching her future die. She told her about Matteo's confession, about choosing love even when it seemed too soon and too complicated. "But weren't you supposed to marry Uncle Luca?" their daughter asked, trying to understand. "I was," Serenity admitted, But sometimes life has other plans. Sometimes the person you're meant to be with is the one you never expected. Do you think Uncle Luca would be mad? Serenity considered that question seriously. I think he would want us to be happy. I think he would understand that sometimes love finds you in the strangest ways, at the strangest times, and I think he would be glad that someone is taking care of me the way your father does. Matteo, overhearing this conversation, pulled Serenity close and kissed her temple. I will always take care of you. That's a promise I made at the altar, and one I intend to keep for the rest of my life. And he did. Through good times and hard times, through the challenges that came with his business and the joys of building a family together, Matteo loved Serenity with a fierce devotion that never wavered. And Serenity loved him back, choosing him again every single day, grateful for the unexpected path that had led her to her true home. 20 years after that fateful day at the cathedral, Serenity stood in her office looking at a photo from Luca's funeral. She rarely looked at photos from that time, but today something had prompted her to pull out the old album. In the photo, she was standing at the graveside in her black dress, and Matteo was beside her, his hand on her elbow in that protective gesture that had become so familiar. Even then, even in that moment of grief, there had been something between them, a connection waiting to be acknowledged. Matteo walked into the office and saw what she was looking at. He moved behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Remembering?" he asked softly. "Always. I never want to forget where we came from, even the painful parts. They're part of our story. They are, and I'm grateful for every moment, even the hard ones, because they led me to you." Serenity turned in his arms to face him. At 58, Matteo was even more handsome than he had been at 37. Silver threaded through his dark hair, lines bracketed his eyes and mouth from years of smiling, but the intensity in his gaze when he looked at her had never diminished. "Do you ever wonder what Luca would think of us now?" Serenity asked. "Of the life we built, the children we raised, the legacy we created?" "I think he would be proud. Surprised, probably, but proud." Matteo cupped her face in his hands. "We did more than just fall in love, Serenity. We built something that matters. We raised children who know the value of integrity and compassion. We used our resources to help people. We turned tragedy into triumph. We did do that, didn't we? Yes, and we are not done yet. We still have years ahead of us, more adventures to have, more love to give." Serenity kissed him slow and deep, still feeling that same spark after 2 decades together. "Then let's make every year count. Let's keep choosing each other, keep building, keep loving. Always," Matteo promised. "In this life and whatever comes next, I will always choose you." Their love story did not begin the way anyone would have chosen. It was born from tragedy and grief, from impossible timing and complicated circumstances, but it was real and deep and worth every difficult moment that had brought them together. Because sometimes the altar you're standing at is not the one you'll leave for married. Sometimes the future you planned shatters, and from the pieces you build something even better. Sometimes the person who saves you is the one who loved you silently from the shadows, waiting for the moment when fate would finally give them their chance. Serenity had been supposed to marry Luca Lombardi, but she had been meant for Matteo all along, and standing at that altar, watching the man she thought she would marry die, had been the devastating moment that finally set her on the path to where she truly belonged. In Matteo's arms, in Matteo's life, in a love that had been worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth every tear and every moment of doubt. That was their story. Impossible and beautiful and absolutely true. A testament to the resilience of the human heart and the mysterious ways that love finds us, even in our darkest moments. Years later, when their daughter was old enough to ask questions, Serenity told her the truth about how she and Matteo met. Not the simplified version, but the real story, with all its complications and tragedy and unexpected grace. She told her about Luca, about standing at an altar in a wedding dress and watching her future die. She told her about Matteo's confession, about choosing love even when it seemed too soon and too complicated. "But weren't you supposed to marry Uncle Luca?" their daughter asked, trying to understand. "I was," Serenity admitted, "but sometimes life has other plans. Sometimes the person you're meant to be with is the one you never expected." "Do you think Uncle Luca would be mad?" Serenity considered that question seriously. "I think he would want us to be happy. I think he would understand that sometimes love finds you in the strangest ways, at the strangest times, and I think he would be glad that someone is taking care of me the way your father does." Matteo, overhearing this conversation, pulled Serenity close and kissed her temple. I will always take care of you. That's a promise I made at the altar, and one I intend to keep for the rest of my life. And he did. Through good times and hard times, through the challenges that came with his business and the joys of building a family together, Matteo loved Serenity with a fierce devotion that never wavered. And Serenity loved him back, choosing him again every single day, grateful for the unexpected path that had led her to her true home. Their love story did not begin the way anyone would have chosen. It was born from tragedy and grief, from impossible timing and complicated circumstances, but it was real and deep and worth every difficult moment that had brought them together. Because sometimes the altar you're standing at is not the one you'll leave for married. Sometimes the future you planned shatters, and from the pieces you build something even better. Sometimes the person who saves you is the one who loved you silently from the shadows, waiting for the moment when fate would finally give them their chance. Serenity had been supposed to marry Luca Lombardi, but she had been meant for Matteo all along, and standing at that altar, watching the man she thought she would marry die, had been the devastating moment that finally set her on the path to where she truly belonged. In Matteo's arms, in Matteo's life, in a love that had been worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth every tear and every moment of doubt. That was their story. Impossible and beautiful and absolutely true. If this incredible story of second chances, unexpected love, and finding home in the most unlikely place moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We share new stories every week about real people who discovered that sometimes the most meaningful connections come from the most complicated circumstances. What did you think of Serenity and Matteo's story? Have you ever had life take you in a completely unexpected direction that turned out to be exactly where you needed to be? Would you have given Matteo a chance? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing how these stories resonate with your own experiences of love, loss, and second chances. Remember, sometimes the altar you're standing at is not where your journey ends. Sometimes tragedy opens doors to futures you never imagined. And sometimes the person who has loved you longest is the one who waited silently, protecting you from afar, until the moment came when they could finally claim you as their own. Thanks for listening, and we will see you in the next story.